All right, guys. Welcome back to another episode. Today I have a special guest. I've got Bill Barnett. Bill Barnett is something that before I jump in and let him just take over, he's somebody that I met, I'd say 2011, probably 2012. It was before the boys were born. So it was through a friend that someone that I knew, and he had a book. I haven't talked with him since. I read his book way back in those days. And it kind of opened my eyes to some stuff. His book is are you dumb enough to be rich?
Yep.
And I highly encourage you to read it if you're new to real estate. It's actually what I usually recommend to new real estate investors because the concepts are simple. Misty and I had one rental, but it really opened our eyes to like what real estate was out there. So, but yeah, man, Bill Barnett, man, I always like to. Thanks for coming on. I'd like to talk about, origin stories and tell us, how you got started.
Yep. Well, so first of all, thank you guys, Chris, Misty. Thank you guys. So let's do this before we jump into that story. So any of the listeners that want to email you let me know and we'll send them a PDF of the book.
Okay.
So just for being on the show today. So
cool.
We thank all you guys for being out there. And Spider, it goes for you too, man.
Thank you.
So
I definitely need it.
So everybody has, everybody's origin story is unique. To say mine's a little different might be a twist. I got divorced twice in the same month.
Oh, wow.
So
you have to start with that.
I haven't met anybody yet that says I can match that or I can be that. So my professional training was in investment banking.
Mm-hmm.
So I started out in Merrill Lynch, downtown Fort Worth, as a stockbroker, and we changed through the years. And a couple of guys and I went out and started a merchant banking firm, which is an arm off of investment banking, and so that lasted for about 10 years, and we had set this deal up, the partners and I, that if any of us got divorced, we had a buyout clause, so that if anybody got divorced, the other two had the right to buy them out. Now, I'm the guy that spearheaded that, and little did I know that I would be the guy that got to do that. So I got served with divorce papers at the office. And so my partners obviously immediately knew. And then so about 2 weeks after I got my divorce, I got my divorce papers from my partners. They were like, hey, we don't. So the whole deal was that there was three guys. So it was like, we didn't want to be in business with somebody else's ex-wife.
Yeah.
And so it ended up, so I got divorced from my wife and I got divorced from my business partners within a 2-week span. It was an interesting time. So I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do to go forward? And I loved investment banking. I had not done any real estate. Now, my dad he would never acknowledge this. My dad was a real estate investor.
Okay.
My dad worked sold cars for years. He worked at a bakery doing route delivery for a bread company. I mean, he was a hardworking dude, but he always had a house that he and my two older brothers and I would rehab, and it would take us like 2 years because we would just do it on weekends. We do some night stuff. We do it on weekend. We do it on vacation, that kind of stuff. And we'd get it rehabbed, and then he'd sell it, and he'd take that money, and we call it rolling up. He'd take that money and all of it he'd spend every bit of it on the next property and get a bigger property, a nicer property. And we lived in those while we were rehabbing them, by the way.
Yeah.
And so we'd move into these things, and I'd just be like, oh, my Lord, Dad. Yeah, because I was in grade school. I was in junior high, and it was just like, I don't get this at all.
You're living in the construction, too, because that's no fun.
So, it was so when my dad retired, he had a 7,000 square foot paid for property out in the country in Alabama, on acreage with a lake, and I started probably at about 30, 32, 3. I started going, that dude's pretty smart. He's never made much money, but he has this amazing lifestyle that's paid for. And so while I'm licking my wounds, I'm divorced. I'm divorced from my partners. I'm like, wow, man, I must really have bad BO or something. So I'm trying to think what I'm going to do. And had every intention of staying in investment banking. And I kept thinking about Dad. And my dad was still alive at the time. And I kept thinking about him. And I said, I think I'll just buy a house. And I know enough about rehab because I had this great thought. It's a house. How tough can it be?
Yeah.
Well, I found out. So I bought a HUD property and started rehabbing it. And a buddy of mine that was a West Point grad, we've been friends for years, just happened to call me, and he goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm rehabbing this house while I figure out where I'm going to go." And he says, "Oh, you want any help with it?" I'm like, "Well, okay, sure." And so he sent half the money in. And so we became 50-50 partners, which is pretty typical for somebody putting up, part of the money. But he was going to help me rehab it. And great point for the listeners: never, ever, never, ever rehab your own properties. That is that's a death knell. It's a profit death knell, if nothing else. So Brad and I are rehabbing this property. And this goes on for a little 1,800 square foot house over by the GM plant in Arlington, for those people that are local here in DFW. So we're doing this thing, and we're like 5-6 months into this, massive square footage, 1,800 feet, and we're not done. So we decided, and we're working 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're like, this is obviously not our calling. We need to find somebody to come in here and finish this. Yeah. And he said, well, I know a guy. So he calls this guy. His name was Jim. We'll just leave it at Jim. So he calls this guy, Jim, to come in to be the GC. So Jim came in from out of town. He spent about 2 weeks at my house. And I told Brad, I was like, dude, no, I didn't bring him to raise. I brought him in to do this property, to finish it for us.
He came to live at the house.
Yeah, I mean, he literally was living in my house for 2 weeks.
He didn't come to fix the house.
He was
like, hey,
sleeping on the couch, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's not what I had in mind.
You got to wake up and kick him and be like, hey, man, you working today?
So he asked me, Brad said, would it be okay if Jim stayed at the house, at the rehab house?
Yeah.
And I said, sure. Okay, so point number 2 for the listeners: don't ever, ever, ever let one of your contractors stay at the property that they're rehabbing. And so, all this stuff is completely brand new. I was like, yeah, it didn't sound like a big deal. And we got the house finished. And Jim did a tremendous job. I have to hand it to him that. He did a tremendous job. And so we put the house on the market. And I'm like, well, Jim, you need to move somewhere. We're showing that, it'll be fine. I'll get out of the way and all that. Well, we sold the house in like 4 days, and we sold it for list. And I'm like, okay, great. So everything's wonderful. We get to close. I show up the title company, and Brad's not there. Brad didn't need to be there. My partner, he didn't need to be there. Either one of us could have signed. So, I closed the deal. I've got Brad's check, got my check. I'm headed back, and I get to the house, and the phone rings, and it's the title company. And they say, hey, the buyers are at the house, and they can't get in. And I'm like, oh, that's not a big deal. I literally checked the keys this morning. Everything was fine. I'll head back over there. They go, no, that's not the problem. I'm like, okay, well, your contractor has barricaded himself in the house. Now, what that turned out to be was he took like 3 2x4s and nailed them on the inside of the front door. So their moving van had showed up. They had this big van lines moving van. And the guy driving, it's a pretty good sized guy. And he had told him, he's like, I can take care of this. And I was like, no.
I said, sign me up, coach.
Tell him no, let me call the professionals and we'll head over there. So I start, before I leave, then I'm going to head straight to the house. I call 911. So here's another tip for all the listeners. Never, ever use the word barricade when you're calling 911. So you got to remember, this was mid-90s. And so I called 911. I was like, yeah, hey, this contractor's barricaded himself in my house. We sold it. I would think it was that big a deal. They'd send somebody out, and that'd be it. So I get to the house. There are 4 police cars. and Channel 8 is there. For those of you locally, ABC, Channel 8's there. And I'm like, wow. And SWAT is on the way. And if you've ever seen that show, Bad Boys, and when they tackle guys and they're leaning across the hood with shotguns, and it was like, that's what it was. And I'm like, can I talk to this guy? And they're like, well, you can talk to him with the bullhorn from behind these cars, but you can't go anywhere, in front of the car. You have to stay on this side, and they're parked in the street. So I'm like, hey, Jim, we talk a couple of minutes, and Jim comes out. Well, the Bad Boys reference is when they jump those guys, the bad guys, that's what they did to Jim. I mean, in a flash, he was on the ground. They like 3 guys on. I was like, holy cow. And so it made the evening news. So my very first deal made the evening news. I'm like, okay.
You still have a tape of that?
I didn't have a tape of it at the time, but it's I'm sure somewhere in the Channel 8 archives it has it. I would use that in all my seminars if I did.
They might have something, man.
But yeah, it was pretty bizarre. And,
so what happened? I got to ask, what happened to the contractor? What happened to him?
Well, they took him to jail.
Yeah.
And about probably 4 hours later, I get this call, and it's Jim. And when I realized it's him, I'm like, Jim, I hope that thing about you only get one call when you're in jail, I hope that's not true. Because if it is, you made a bad decision.
You shouldn't have called me.
So he gave me his dad's number. And Jim was like in his late 40s.
Yeah.
And he gave me his dad's number, who lived in Kansas or something. And I called his dad. And I had found out at that time that Jim had been a recovering alcoholic, and something had happened, and he fell off the wagon, and that's what caused him to barricade himself. And his dad came down, and that's the last. His dad told me he'd come down and take care of it. That's the last I heard of it.
Did he fall off the wagon within the 4 days of being sold, or did he fall off the wagon?
At least he finished the house first.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
I said, did he
it was sometime between finishing the house and the close. I maybe it was the stress of I got to move.
Yeah.
He didn't have anything to move, but
the funny part is there's someone out there that tells that exact same story, but they're the ones with the moving van. They're the ones that showed up and they're like, "Man, we bought this house, and we couldn't get in, and the police showed up, and it looked like Waco." I mean,
and at least once a year, I drive by that house. So,
do you?
Yeah, it's right off of Sherry. If for those of you that live around the Arlington area,
that's the vision and stuff.
So you're right there at General Motors. It is south of General Motors, and not far at all.
You got to see it. That's
every day I just got to go by and go, yep, there it is.
So you ended up getting divorced twice in the same day.
Same month.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
I don't know if I could have handled day.
Twice in the same.
He would have ended it up like Jim.
Yeah, I'd have been Jim's roommate.
He barricaded himself in the office. So you ended up divorced twice in the same month, and then you looked around and you thought, okay, well, you did your first deal, and kind of what transpired from there to say, okay, so we did that deal, and like try it again, or what was it?
What is really interesting from the fact that I still thought that I was going to stay in investment banking.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, we made a little cash. We made just about every mistake you can possibly make on one deal.
Yeah. And
we still made $30,000. And think about when this was. When we're talking mid 90s, maybe 96, $30,000 on a house over there in Arlington, that was a pretty good profit back then.
Yeah.
So we still made, and I split with Brad. So we each had $15,000. We're like, hey, let's do this again. But I still, in my heart, thought, I'm going to look at another investment banking opportunity and go there. And like B of A was reaching out to me, and some other people were reaching out, and I was like, let me think about it. And we bought another house. So Brad and I bought another house, and then Brad got an opportunity to move to Vegas, and he went to Vegas. And after we finished that second house, which is another story where the Patio of Death emerged. But after that, I was like, I think I'll do this a little while. And here we are almost 30 years now.
So you decided, you feel like you kind of fell into it at some point?
Absolutely.
You just kind of like.
Yeah, it just it's like so many things, and I tell people this all the time. I've told all three of my boys this. The younger that you can figure out, if you can ever figure out where you're supposed to be, and the younger that you can figure out where you're supposed to be, your life is just so different. I look at athletes and I marvel at them, and one of the things I marvel at, in that I just am so happy for them, is that they figure it out in early. This is me. This is where I'm supposed to be. And so many of us, it takes years and years and years and years. I thought I was on that track, and in college the knee exploded and was like, okay, so that's probably not back in the day when arthroscopic was not even a dream yet. Yeah. So I tell my boys that all the time. If you can figure out what it is that is meaningful to you, gosh, your life just so different, and it moves forward so fast. So that's just the coolest thing in real estate for me, is just about the third or fourth house. I was like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And then I got invited to speak a few times, and that's where my heart is in teaching. Yeah. I still do real estate. I got 4 flips going on right now. So I do it every day. I love it. I eat, sleep, drink, dream, whatever, all real estate. But
you teach because it helps. One, it makes you sharper, but also two, it helps you. You already know, like, hey, this can be life changing. Yeah. And so when the right person hears it, yeah, I'm sure you've probably taught many people that they come, they show up, and they're like excited, they leave, and then they don't do anything. But then there's that one person or those two people that go, I remember when.
Well, you guys.
That was it. Yeah, the book for me was one. You had no clue. Oh. That was like that was in the background 10 years, 12 years working, that somebody's like, man, I read that. Like, without that, I probably, and I had some other help. There was another individual that was one of the jiu-jitsu students that kind of did multifamily, and that was all around the same
Very
time.
Cool.
And so he kind of introduced me to that, and he's like, hey man, here's, by the way, Bill's got a book. And I was like, he's got a book, and so, there's that one person that you look back and it makes it worth it. Right? You're like, okay, so I'm glad I did that. Otherwise, it's that give back. I remember being told, anyone's ever helped me, or I remember being told this by a mentor, like, you've got one job. I'm going to help you. You don't pay me anything, but you got to give it back. Yeah. That's it. You do that, we're straight. You don't do that. And
I've had, like you, I've had so many people in my life that have helped me.
Yeah.
And many of them have said, hey, dude, pay it forward.
Yep.
And, it changes. So the guy that co-wrote all the chicken soup books, Mark Victor Hansen, Mark's been my big brother in business since 76. So he was the first guy to ever get me on stage.
Yeah.
So I had called him one day because, like I said, he was my business big brother. He's kind of my big brother, but I really looked at him from a business standpoint. And this was long before chicken soup. It was way before that. And I'd call him, and I had a tremendous quarter. It would still be a very good quarter today. At the time, it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. And so I called him and I said, hey, I'm trying to get through this income ceiling that I apparently have set for myself, and I don't think I have, but I keep hitting this number, and it was $1 million. I'm like, I got to break through a mill, and I'd get to a mill and I'd drop down, and I'd get to a mill, and I was like, it was driving me crazy. And so I called Mark and I said, hey, let me tell you what's been going on. So I went through this past quarter, and I was like, hey, this is, he was like, this is terrific. I'm like, yeah, I would have never thought that this could be done or that I could do this, but yeah. And so while we're talking, and he gave me a solution, which was incredibly simple.
So, it always is, right?
Yeah. He was like, so tell me about, just tell me about one house. And at the time, so again, we're back in the 90s, and this was probably late 90s now, maybe 98, 99, something like that. I said, well, I'm making 20 to 30, and I don't have any more time. At my peak, I was doing 12 at one time. And that's like, the reason I have very little hair is because I was doing 12 at one time. And so I'm telling Mark this, and he goes, well, have you ever thought about simply making more money per deal. It was one of those, could have had a V8 moments, slap my forehead. I'm like, oh my God. But it changed the way I did my business. But Mark said at the time, he's like, I'm in the next weekend or 10 days or something. He said, I'm having this event out in Glendale, California. I got 700 people coming out, and I want you to come out and tell them what you just told me. I'm like, Mark, those people in California, they don't want to hear about my little real estate business in Fort Worth, Texas. Are you crazy? He's like, no, I think they will. I'm like, well, I don't speak. And he goes, well, you don't have to. Come out, I'll interview you, and I'll guide the conversation. We'll just do 15 minutes or so. Let's 15, 20, that's it. But I'll just interview you. I'm like, okay. So I go out, and we go through this deal. He's at the Ritz-Carlton in Glendale. And I would never do this today. I got in like 2 hours before I was supposed to go on stage. And so I walk in the back of this room, and they had 700 people, correct. But they were at dinner tables. They were at those 8-foot dinner tables, and they're all sitting on the back half of the table. So it looked like it was about a mile from the back of the room up to the stage. I'm like, holy cow.
A lot of people.
Mark sees me, and I'm the last guy to come on before break. So he calls me up, and I get up there, and I remember about 2 minutes, because as we started doing the interview, and he was a handheld mic, and we're just standing side by side, our shoulders are touching. Well, about 2 minutes into this thing, my knees start giving out, and I'm like on an elevator. I'm just like, I'm slowly going down. And Mark's probably, he's certainly 6'4". He might be 6'5". He's a pretty good sized guy, pretty athletic. So he sees what's going on, and he reaches around me and literally cups me up under the arm and holds me up for the rest of the interview. Now, I don't remember from the time that he stopped me from going down, I don't remember anything I said. When I consciously came to, I'm halfway out of the room, and there's this crazy standing ovation going on. And we break for lunch, and I get mobbed. And I'm like, what in the world's going on here? And so these people are like, can you teach me how to do that? And Mark sees this, and he jumps back on the mic, and he says, everybody calm down. No, everybody stay right there. Bill, don't go anywhere. Stay right there. I'm coming right back. And so I wait for him, and he comes back, and he says, here's what we're going to do. You're going to take 16 of these people, and you're going to mentor them in real estate. And I'm like, I am? And so we did phone mentoring for 16 people. And one of those guys went on to make more than $6 million getting started with once a week phone mentoring. And it really started what turned out, evolved into Are You Dumb Enough to Be Rich, and a speaking career that I've been incredibly blessed with. And
What's crazy is that you're like you said, the once a week phone mentoring. Nowadays things are so, you can do things like the meetings and Zooms and stuff like that. But you were on the forefront of some of that stuff where it was just, you got to be on a conference call. You didn't get to see face to face, but it also proved that you can still, because we go through this. So we opened a brokerage some years back, and agents have this thing where they're like, oh yeah, I need someone next.
Shadow somebody.
And we share that as well, by the way. I have a brokerage firm.
Yeah, I mean, you're why I opened a brokerage. You didn't know that, but as I learned years ago, I was like, that's where I need to be. I need a brokerage so I can do what he's doing to leverage it for what we do. So that was actually kind of how things turned out. It was more to leverage. We lean a lot more towards property management than anything else now.
Very cool.
But that was it. Was just kind of success leaves clues. So you start watching what people are doing, right? So yeah, I remember that. I was like, I need to do that. But the we on the agent side, when you bring on new agents, it's always the same thing. There's a lot of I need a shadow. I need someone next to me, hold my hand, that kind of stuff. But versus, I mean, what you're talking about proves like you don't need that. That's a phone call, and that's just someone who's willing to go out there to work. They did the work,
and these were like 30, 45 minutes. Yeah, and they weren't Zooms, they weren't any of that. It was just phone calls. Like, so here's what you need to do now. Okay, so here's what you need to do now, and It's crazy how it worked.
That one big success was would prove the pudding, or put the proof in the pudding that actually it all worked.
So that guy's a guy from Canada named Kieran Sweeney, and for years there's a guy named T. Harvecker that was out training it, and he was a motivational trainer. And Kieran ended up being the president of his company, and I got invited. I spoke for Harv several times, and so I'm out in Palm Springs. They're doing a 4-day event called "Never Work a Day in Your Life Again." And so they called me. I was like, "Yeah, man, I'll come out and speak." And so I'm out there, and Harv is starting to introduce me, and I'm standing off stage, and there's 1,400 people. They're a nice sized crowd. And in the back of the room, Kieran starts coming up the center aisle. He's jogging up the center. He's like, Harv, wait a minute, wait. And it's obvious Harv was like, is there a fire in the building or what? He had no idea what it was. And I'm like, well, I got no idea what it is. And he goes, I want to introduce Bill. And Harv's like, okay. And so Kieran goes up, and he goes through the story of being in the crowd with Mark Victor Hansen and being one of the 16 people that Mark chose to do this phone mentoring. And I know he had done okay. I knew that because we had stayed in touch, but I had no idea that he had done what he had done. And so he says, he's telling the story, and he ends it with, and to date, I've made $6.5 million because of this man, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Barnett. And I'm sitting there going, and of course the crowd goes wild. And I was like, can I hire you to come introduce me everywhere? So.
I mean, that's such a big payoff. I mean, just internally to go, this guy went out here and did all this. And then, that's a good feeling. I mean,
absolutely.
It leaves you walking away going,
absolutely,
man, that was worth every penny of it. For every person that may not do something where you're like, man, they had so much potential.
Yep.
That one makes it worth it.
Well, and we stress people all the time. I'm like, look, you don't have to quit your job.
Yeah.
You don't have to be full time. If you will just start with, I'm going to get one. Mm-hmm. And then the next year you're going to get one. And then the next year, on a 10-year basis, you can set your retirement, depending on what age you start. You can set your retirement. And then what you're likely to find is that, well, gee, that didn't take near as much time as I thought it was. Maybe I can do 2. Mm-hmm. And then maybe I can do 4. And then it starts to scale up, and you start understanding that if I get some training and talk to some people that are at a different level. I tell people this all the time. I'm like, I still get training all the time. I still have mentors. And I look at people that are at a different level than where I am. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing that everybody should do, no matter who you're looking at for training. One, if you resonate with them, that's so crucial. You have to just connect with that person so that you can take what they say on face value and not question everything. And then the other thing is, where are they? If I'm here, they need to be here. If I'm here, they need to be there. And that stays with you for your entire career. It stays with you for your entire life, because nobody ever gets there. It's always the journey.
There's no end. It's almost disappointing. It's not disappointing, but there is no end. It doesn't stop. I mean,
what's incredibly cool is that the circle that you're running with changes as you step up.
Right.
And you still have your old friends. So we were talking about Chuck Yielding, and Chuck, if you're listening, love you, brother. So I heard Chuck go play some country music a few days ago. So it's that thing of the people that you're running with at the time. Mm-hmm. You get into a different circle as you go up, but those people are still your friends. Right. You still keep the people that are important to you. It's not like, I'm a different circle, flush all those people. No, you keep the people that are important to you. And then it just grows up, and you step up and you step up, and then you look at it sometimes and you go, holy cow, the people that you're kind of hanging out with. And it's like,
yeah,
like, wow.
I was actually this morning, it's funny you touched on it. This morning, I like to listen to Tim Grover a lot, especially when I like do my 3-mile runs. That's like most people listen to music when they run. It's Tim Grover. It's over and over. And one of the things was talking about like this never ending. It's relentless. Like you're constantly, no matter how many times, like where some people may celebrate and be like, I've arrived. There's others that are like, oh man, I got to do this all over again. And it's not disappointing. But you're like you're more like,
it's exciting. Yeah.
It's like, okay, the party's not for like, there's no celebration, just because you succeeded at that. You're like, all right, it's almost like you go get your check, you flip the house. You're like, all right, cool. I deposited it, and then then the low starts again. You're like, well, we got to restart this process, over and over and over. One thing I want to kind of touch back on, you mentioned that we haven't really talked on this show, and I think that there's a lot of value to this is income ceiling. You mentioned that. Kind of talk about that a little bit, kind of what you had experienced over the years, and just kind of what that looks like. Not saying you got to go numbers, but just saying in general, like, I think that's something people struggle with.
Yeah.
I know I've had those times, and I know I still have those times where I'm like, I got to break that ceiling. I got to break that ceiling. But what does that look like just in your experience all these years? Because I'm sure we all experience it.
I've hit it multiple times.
What is that like? How do you break through and stuff? What's
the first time that really caught me off guard? It was back 84, it might have been 85, 84, 85. I made 150.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the clouds are going to part. I'm going to hear angels singing, and it just came and went. It was so incredibly uneven. I had never made over 100, and I make 150 that the next year. And I'm just like, wow. And it was in like a split second, you see your tax return. You're just kind of like, okay, what's next?
Yep.
And then, so, it keeps ratcheting up. So you get to this point, and this is what the conversation with Mark, Victor Hansen, this is a lot of what that was about, was you're seeing yourself as you are at this instant. You're not seeing yourself as you can be. And I was like, I got to think on that a little bit. And so up until you've done something, you don't have an experience yet. And our mind can, if we're not training it correctly, can hold us back.
Right.
And so one of the things that Mark said to me that I found incredibly interesting, he goes, so how much time are you taking off? I'm like, Mark, I'm not taking any time off. I'm trying to get through this barrier. He goes, that's the problem. You need to start taking some time off. And I'm like, I don't get that. And he goes, obviously. He goes, but here's the thing. If you don't take any time off, you end up working in your business. And he said, Bill, that's what you're doing. You're working in your business. You're not working on your business. And we've all heard that. I'd heard that so many times I thought I'd puke if somebody else said it to me. And I'm like, all right, stop.
Yeah.
I want that explained. I'm tired of hearing it with nobody going through the detail of what that really means. And he goes, well, you're tied up in the day-to-day activity of the business. You're putting out fires. He said, that's working in your business. When you take some time off, and I love cruising. I've been on way too many. But so, or going to Florida for 10 days or whatever it happens, whatever you like to do. If you like to go to the mountains or whatever. So when you do that, then you think about, so you're not going to get away. The thought process of going on a vacation is to get away from all of this. You will not. But you will think about it differently. You'll think about, while you're sitting there with your kids in the ocean or whatever, you'll be thinking about, how can I do this better? Not about the fire that may be going on at that particular moment. And he said, and that's working on your business. So how do we handle the structure better? How do we bring in more contractors? How do we bring in better contractors? How do I get more removed from the day-to-day issue? And the more removed I can get, the better off the business is going to be. And he said, and that's so, Ron LeGrand is a hero of mine. I've known Ronnie for 25 years or so and spoken on his stages many times and love the guy. And so he has this saying about do less, earn more.
It's true.
And it exactly
it's
fits.
absolutely true.
It's exactly what Mark was saying. He didn't say it that way, but it's the same thought. And it's getting more into what does it take to actually run this business than, I have a buddy that owns a landscaping business. And he still goes out and cuts grass. And we've had a conversation or having a couple of beers, hey, I can't scale my business. And I'm like, okay. He goes, well, talk to me. And I'm like, I know why you can't scale your business. And he goes, why? I said, because you cut grass every day.
Yeah.
He goes, well, a lot of landscaping companies are like, that's not it. It's because you're cutting grass every day. You're so consumed, just like I was, with here's what's going on with this yard, as opposed to the business. Here's what's going on with my business, and having some people under you that are consumed with what's going on with this yard, but not you, because it doesn't allow you to be able to flourish, your mind to be able to open up and go, hey, here's how we can do this better. I said, so, that's take $5 and buy a Starbucks, and there you have your value there. But
that explanation is just fire. So anybody listens to that explains it, and I 100% agree with it. I mean, I had to be told the same thing at one point. I had someone tell me that, like, hey, and that is a killer explanation. That, Misty, is why I have coffee breaks. When we took the martial arts academy part-time and went full-time in real estate, in the brokerage, and just property management stuff, I was like, I refused to rework, because it was always me teaching, and I was like, I don't want to go back into that. And and I knew what that was like. It was grinding, and you can't grow from that. It's so hard when you're grinding every day. I mean, you go home, you're tired, there's nothing else left. You're not thinking about, like you said, I agree with that. You're not thinking about the business. You're not thinking about how to grow it. You're just thinking about how to get to that next customer, how to get to the next this and that. But I always get into Misty because she's still a little bit in the grind, but we'll get out of that. But I refuse to go back in. So at least one of us is out of it, the most, most of it. So, but I agree with that. That's a fire explanation. That explains, perfect. That's killer. That's killer. I got to ask, how'd you meet Mark? How did you guys end up becoming friends? And
gosh, I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And in the 75-ish, I had this couple that were probably 6-7 years older, and very good friends, Wayne and Judy Rhodes. And Wayne played football at Alabama and was several years ahead of me. And so he was one of my heroes. And I got to meet him socially, and we became fast friends. And so Judy calls me one day, and she goes, hey, Wayne and I are going to this event, and we would like to have you go with us. And I said, okay, great. What is it? I'm thinking they're going to a concert or something. I was like, yeah, what is it? And they said, it's this thing called a positive thinking rally. And I'm like, okay, what is that? And they're like, there are 8 of the greatest speakers in the world going to be there, and they're going to talk for like an hour each. And I'm like, I cannot think of anything more boring than to go hear people talk. Are you kidding? I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested. Well, and Judy was crushed. She was like, I can't believe this. And I'm like, she's like, and you guys may not even remember these names. Those guys like Paul Harvey and Art Linkletter and Earl Nightingale, who founded Nightingale Conant Motivation, and Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, and Zig Ziglar. So
that's where I started out.
So Zig was probably in his 40s. He had jet black hair.
Yeah.
So, and at that time, that name meant absolutely nothing to me. And I'm like, well, I've heard of Paul Harvey, and because I hear him on the radio, and I know who Art Linkletter was because he had a TV show for many years, and I'm just like, but yeah, no, I don't know, I'm 24 or something, and so they call me again, and like 4 or 5 days later, Judy's like, Wayne really wants you to go, and I'm like, Judy, I have no interest in going. So then a few days later, Wayne calls me and he goes, here's the deal. I'll buy your ticket. You go. If you don't like it, it's on us. If you like it, you can pay me back. And now that you'll get a kick out of this, the tickets were $20.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, $20, man, I don't know, So I ended up going. I basically got shamed and guilted into going. And I go and I hear Zig, and Zig just blows me away, just blew me away. I was promoting concerts at the time. And so I was working with a guy named Harry Chapin. If you've ever heard Cats in the Cradle, that's typically the song that most people associate with Harry. I was promoting him. B.J. Thomas, who lived in Arlington for many years, was on tour at the time, and I was doing work with BJ. And so I got this idea that I'd bring Zig back because he spoke for 45 minutes. And I was like, no, that's not enough. Stop, wait, And so I thought, well, I'll bring him back in and do it like a concert. I'll bring him back in and we'll do a couple of hours or so. Well, we ended up doing 4 hours. And I promoted it like a concert at the Birmingham Jefferson Civic Center in the concert hall. We sold out 3,500 people. And getting Zig book's a whole nother story. But after the deal is over with, and we're across the street from, at that time it was called the Hyatt, and they had this nice restaurant on the top of it, and he was staying at the Hyatt. And he said, "Do you want to have dinner?" I was like, "Sure." So we go over, and he said, "Did you enjoy this?" I'm like, "Man, I love this. I had so much." I said, "I love concerts. This was so much more fun." And he goes, "Well, I know these guys that do the positive thinking rallies," which is obviously my exposure to him. And I was like, "Really?" He goes, "They could use a guy like you." And like a week later, a guy named David Cooper called me, and they were based out of Memphis. And he drove down to Birmingham to interview me. And within 10 days, I was traveling on the road with positive thinking rallies. And I did that for about 3.5 years. And fast forward several years, so that company ends up shutting down, and I end up getting a job with the truck lines. I was the youngest manager ever in the history of Carolina Freight Carriers, who got absorbed many years ago. But when we were doing that, and I was out doing the trucking thing, my boss got hired by another company. And I love the guy, Bob Roberts. I just thought he was fabulous. And he called me about a week or so after he had left the company. He's with this new company. He says, "Hey, I want you to come work with me." And I'm like, "I'd love to." And he goes, "Well, you're going to have to move." And I'm like, "Now, wait a minute, Bob. There's only one place in the world that I would even consider moving." And he goes, "Where's that?" And I said, "Dallas." And that was because of Zig. Mm-hmm. And he said, "I guess you better start packing." And that was the job offer, was to come to Dallas for a company called Matlack, which is a bulk carrier still out there today. They're still running up and down the highway. And so I took the job and came out. And so Zig ended up for about 7 years was my second father. And awesome. We did a television show because of Zig. And Zig was on the show for 8 times called Dawn, DAWN, Dynamic Achievers World Network. And that was a half-hour morning motivational show played in 55% of the nation, mostly on NBC affiliates. And so every day we'd have somebody like Zig, but like I said, Zig did 8, Mark Victor Hansen did 4 of those, and it was just a blast. And you
just ended up running. You ended up running a different circle.
Yeah,
just because you were like, yeah. All right, fine. I'll pay this $20.
I know.
$20 and I run into a circle.
I look back at that.
Yeah, like now people, you're
when you get a little older in life, a little I'm just going to say more mature in life, and you look back at those split-second deals that completely change your life, and finally going, yeah, okay, I'll go to that. Yeah, the whole path of my life changed from that exposure, from one presentation. I enjoyed the other people, but I would have never gone back to hear any of those other people. They had Jerry Clower there, who was a country comedian at the time. And I was like, oh, he was great. This was kind of their levity for the event. And I enjoyed Paul Harvey, and I enjoyed Art Linkletter and Earl Nightingale. And I was just really impressed with them. But I don't think I'd have ever gone back to really hear them again. But Zig set me on fire.
Yeah. So I got to see him once. He was the start for me. I remember at 16, my jiu-jitsu instructor was like, "Hey, man, you're going to learn to sell? You need to take these CDs." And I was like, all right. Yeah, it was a CD. So I was in the car, and he put me to sleep at first. And I'm like, man, then he's talking positive thinking, because my instructor would play that stuff in the car. He'd play the CDs in the car, and I'm like, man, why are we listening to this stuff? Like, kind of the same thing you're talking about. I'm 16, but I'm like, why am I don't, can we just play the radio? Put on K104, so, we want, but I look back and I'm like, that was such a huge deal, especially to have run those circles, you particularly to be able to run those circles. And, he was local, obviously, here in Dallas, and that was a huge one. And then, of course, Zig, obviously, you start branching off, and there's so many other people. So Man, that's a hell of a
So that's how I met. So the question was, I'm sorry, the question was how to meet Mark Victor Hansen. So
killer.
Positive Thinking Rallies had a smaller version called American Sales Training Association. And what they were doing was they would take guys like Mark, who were coming up through the speaker side of the world, and they would put them out on these smaller stages with American Sales Training. And then when they got to a point they thought they were ready, they would move them over to Positive Thinking Rallies. And so if you were working for Positive Thinking Rallies and there happened to be an ASTN meeting coming up in the same city, because we typically worked about 6 weeks at a time in a city. And so you'd go help on that as well. And that's how I met Mark. But so Mark was one of those guys that were bringing up, and we just kind of hit. He was a young guy, and we just kind of hit it off. And Bill Cantrell, who passed about 10 days ago, Bill was from Memphis, and we became fast friends back then. And he ended up living here when I moved out. I moved out here, out to Dallas. I had called back to the guy that was our boss, guy named David Cooper. I'd called back to David, and we stayed in touch through the years, and I was like, hey, and I'd always ask, hey, so where's Cantrell? And so, hey, where's Stewie? And I said, where's Cantrell? And he goes, well, he's living in Arlington, Texas. And I'm like, holy cow, you're kidding. And he gave me his number, and we hooked back up, and we've stayed in touch ever since until he just recently passed. An incredible speaker, great trainer. So miss you, brother.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to circle back to another one, the Patio of Death. I wrote this down. I was like, I have my little notes. I'm like, I want to circle back to things. The Patio of Death. I got to hear what happened. Second flip. Someone died. Or what happened?
Yeah. So we buy this house over in Arlington on Turf Club, and nice little corner property, and you walk out the back door, and it really just had a back stoop. It was like 4 by 8, concrete. And we were like, man, it had a nice backyard. We were like, this could really, and Brad was, he and I were still doing stuff together. Like, this would really be great if it had like maybe a 16 by 16. I don't know why we came up with that number, but it was like patio. And we're like, yeah. And so, it's concrete. We can do this. And so we decide we're going to do this. We go to Home Depot like at 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And we're back and we're looking at the Saccharine. And on the back of the bags of Saccharine, it tells you how to calculate how many bags you need. So I got my carpenter's pencil on my ear, and I'm looking at this back of this bag, and I'm literally writing on the back of the bag, doing my math calculation. I'm like, man, that ain't right. And I go through it again. I get the same answer. I'm like, that ain't right. And about the third time, one of the guys at work there comes over. He says, can I help you? I'm like, yeah, I'm doing this calculation, but this can't be right. And he goes, well, what are you looking at? I'm saying, well, we're looking at 16 by 16, 4 to 6 inches deep. We're just doing a patio, and it's not going to have a cover or anything. And he's like, yeah. He goes, no, your number's right. Well, the number was 258 bags. And I'm like, he goes, well, we'll deliver that for you. I'm like, okay. So I'm like, we'd like to do this today. And he said, well, it's probably 6:30 by now. He says, we can probably get it there by 10:30. And I'm like, okay, cool. He's like, well, how you going to mix it? Well, we're going to go over and get a mixer from A1 Rentals. And so we're in this Jeep Cherokee, and the tongue and the bumper are like this because this mixer it looked like a Civil War mortar. It was huge. So we get it pulled up. We get everything set up. We got our form put out, and we're just humping it. We are working, and it's July, and it's 100 plus. And so about 2:30 or 3 o'clock, the girl that I was dating at the time comes over just to check on us. And she comes walking up and literally starts yelling. She's like, you guys go sit down. And we're like, what? Sit down right now. Go get in the shade and sit down. And she walks over to the mixer and we had a garden hose. She pulls the hose out, comes over, and she starts watering us down. And we're like, what? She goes, both of you guys have white rings around your mouth. You're going to die of heat exhaustion if you do not stop this. Stop. Keep this water on you. I'll be right back. And she went over to 7-Eleven and picked up Snickers and orange juice and stuff and came back. And we still felt pretty good when she came back. And then about 2 hours later, we just crashed beyond belief and couldn't hardly get out of bed the next day. Our muscles were cramped up. It was like, and just had no idea how close to heat exhaustion we really were.
Yeah.
And we would have just, if she hadn't come along, we'd have just kept on until one of us had fallen over probably.
Yeah, you're like, we gotta get this done.
So we're like, yep, probably not a job. And will tell you this, I have not done any more concrete since then.
Yeah. Which leads me to the next thing, because there's something that there's a phrase that you wrote in your book that I said to my mom the other day, actually. We're going through a little rehab, right? Just kind of to set the stage. So we had a tenant move out. They just didn't take care of the place. It's one of our properties that we own. And we own half of it with my parents. It was kind of how I introduced them to real estate. You know, after they watched us, they're like, "Oh, I think we'll jump in too with you guys finally." You know, so my mom's like, "Well, we need to do this, this, and that." And I was like, "Mom, I don't pick anything up. I don't do any of that." I was like, "I'm a professional check writer." And that was a phrase that I remember reading in your book, was like, your job is to be that.
Yeah.
I kind of want because that goes back to a little bit of income ceiling and some other things, and just working in your business, and, you know, we're not working on your business, not in, but that phrase sticks with me. And I still say that jokingly and serious at the exact same time.
Because it is a serious statement.
I'm a professional check writer. So talk about that a little bit. That's, I mean.
Well, you can't fully grow your business if you're in painting. And I always use painting as the example, because kind of like when I said it's a house, how difficult can it be? I had the same thoughts about painting. Well, when you see the difference between a professional painter and somebody that's just slapping paint on a wall, it's very different, and it's noticeably different. Mm-hmm. And so you'll never be able to scale your business if you're involved in any of that stuff. When you try to scale your business, what you're looking at is you're the CEO. So I had the great honor for a little over 3 years to work with the Trump organization. I never got to meet President Trump, but I was one person removed from him. The guy I reported directly to former President Trump, and it's one of the highlights of my career life. But I can't imagine him ever going in to a building site and picking up anything. Yeah. You know, blueprints maybe. You know, tell me what this is, how's this going, are we doing this way? But, you know, anything else, nah. Because you can't scale your business if you're involved in that. So your job, whether this is your first deal or your 100th or 1,000th deal, your job is to oversee the process so that you can go out and do more deals. And we all hear that. And I can't stress how true it is. And so the guys that work for me, when they first start working with you, they're like, and they're all independent contractors, by the way. Make sure you make note of that. They are not employees. You know, but they're like, well, is there going to be something behind this? Well, after they've done 5 or 6 with you, it's like, yeah, you get it. There's more than you can keep up with. So you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, am I going to be working next week? Yeah, you know, we've got you months and months and months out there. You know, and you don't have to worry about me bringing on other crews. As I bring on other crews, there's a reason.
Right.
So you don't have to freak out. Oh my gosh, am I being replaced? No, you're not. The business is just continuing to grow. And the more it grows, the safer your hours are.
Yep.
And so it's just that, you know, my job is to oversee what's happening, to stroke the check and stay out of the way.
Yeah. Be a professional check writer.
Yep.
I always tell Misty, the joke I like to tell her is, and because there's a few times where I had to pick something up, I'm like, someone's getting fired. Someone's getting replaced. If I showed up to do some work like that, someone's getting replaced. I refuse. I don't want to do any of that work. I know what I'm good at, and I know I'm not.
And it's not. And this is very important for people to understand. It's not that you're above that.
Right.
I can do way too much electrical stuff. I can do way too much plumbing stuff. I've spent time framing houses. I mean, I've got a pretty solid education in the physical side of rehabbing a property, but you can't grow doing that. Mm-hmm. It's nice to know. I appreciate the experience, but it interferes with the growth of your business.
Yeah.
Our job is to be able to understand what they do, not necessarily be able to do what they do.
Do you think that some of that comes from, because I know I've felt this in the past. Do you think some of that comes from people feeling like I've got to be out there next to them? If that
Yeah,
makes any sense, like that,
yeah,
like it's like a lead from the front, but you are leading from the front. It's just, but you're like, I feel like I have to do it with them. If I don't do it with them,
Be in the trenches.
yeah, they won't
yeah.
respect me or this or that.
And what I have found through the years is that they will respect you if you know where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a clear-cut idea of this is what we want to do with this property.
Right.
And when I make a decision like that, I'm like, I want to hear what you have to say. But when I make the decision, that's the decision.
Right.
And it's not, well, we'll figure that out somewhere down the road. It's like, no, this is what we're going to do. And this is how I want it done. Now, if you have a different opinion on that, I want to hear that opinion. And I've learned so much through the years from my contractors, but I want to hear that opinion. But you have to understand that I may say, no, we're not going that way. And if I say, no, we're not going that way, then no, we're not going that way.
Right.
And so I think people want to follow people that know where they're going. And so whether we're doing a house, whether it's our career, it doesn't matter. It's that those are the people that we look to, whether we understand that or not. And that's how they look to us as well, is if you have a direction and you're committed to that and you know where you're going, then people go, I want to jump on that train. I want to be a part of that.
I like that. I like that a lot. So I want to kind of delve a little. I know we've talked a lot of mindset stuff like that, which I enjoy talking. I think that's huge. That's almost what 90%.
Well, that's the
I mean,
business.
that's the business.
That's
right?
the business. Yeah.
So I do want to talk about your just kind of your thought process on, because everyone's different. And that's one thing I love is out of everybody we've had in this show, and it's everyone has such a different thought process on things. Like there's no, if there's anything that I guess we've picked up from doing this all this time, is that there's no wrong answer, and you have your way of doing it. So I want to ask your way of doing it. I know we've talked flips. What do you feel as far as like flips and rentals, and like where, like your kind of methodology or thought process behind that? Do you start with flips? Do you go straight to rentals, or how does that look like for
me? The way that I went and the way that I teach to go is to start with flips, but I call it the circle of real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And that you start with either wholesale or flips, and then you follow the market with that. So right now, we're starting nationally. We're starting to go out of a flip market, and we're going into a rental market.
Right.
And so if I'm accumulating cash through the flip cycle, I'm doing that to be able to pick up rentals and residual income. And I tell people, you think you may want to be a rehabber for the rest of your life, and I am and will be, but that's not the only thing you're going to do. You're going to build residual income. That's really what we're doing this for, even if you don't know it yet. You're wanting to have that check coming in every month that I don't have to do anything else for. I've already done that work, and it pays me over and over and over. But I have to start that many times by doing flips to create the cash to be able to go buy the rental property, to be able to just cover my down payments, and then to build that. And you just keep building that. And then as the market comes back around, like I think we're probably looking at another 5, maybe 6 years of this market. And we're very blessed here in Texas. We still have a very good market. It's cooled off substantially from where it was, but we're so much better than most of the country, and we'll stay that way because of people moving in here. But in other parts of the country, it's already hard. It's already dropped fast. And if you look at the national numbers, so people say, how come you don't get freaked out about the market? And I don't get freaked out because I look at the underlying items that cause all this to happen. I look at the foreclosure statistics every month. I look at how many foreclosures have been sold, how many new foreclosure filings there have been. And we're right now, we've just passed our 18th month in a row. So think back a year and a half ago. Market's still pretty doggone good a year and a half ago. But we were already having more new foreclosure filings than we sold of existing foreclosures, which means the foreclosure inventory was building. And it's continuing to build. And now, of course, we've had the interest rate spikes that have come along that, and that's slowing things down. And so many people look at, especially the media, they look at the new housing market. One, it's a sexier market than the existing housing market, but the existing housing market is it's exponentially larger than the new housing market. And so, this brand new subdivision today that opens up, well, 6 months from now, it's part of the existing housing market. It's no longer part of the new. Once it's sold, it becomes part of the existing housing market. So it's just so much larger. And those are the numbers I like to follow. I like to look at listings, how many listings, what's the percentage of that? Are we off from this time last year, this time last month? What's that going year to date? Are we off? Number of listings, how many of those close? And those kind of things. When you're looking at that, you see the market months in advance. Mm-hmm. The great thing, one of the things that I think is fabulous about what we do is, unlike the stock market, which can literally change, it could have changed while we've been in here doing this.
Yeah.
The real estate market's not like that. It's a battleship. It takes a while for it to turn. It's not a speedboat that you can whip around in 100 feet. This is like, if you ever look at naval vessels, or if you're on a cruise ship, it takes them a while to make a turn. And I mean, it's like, it
just ask the Titanic.
Yeah, it's just hopefully not that turn, but
Misty.
But yeah, it takes a big space for them to be able to move those things, and that's the real estate market.
Yeah,
it takes time, and it's a slow process up and down. And so when you're looking at those underlying numbers, it doesn't come as a surprise to you, and it's just a tweak to your business. It's not, oh my gosh, I got to rework my business. No, it's a tweak.
And it's forgiving as well.
Oh, big time.
Because you can hold on to something forever and be like, well, I won't sell it.
There's so many times that you can make a really dumb decision and put yourself in a bad hole with real estate.
Yeah.
And you can hang on to it, and it comes back.
Forgive you.
And it goes ahead. And that doesn't happen in most other businesses. Most other businesses, you make that bad mistake, you're eating it. Yeah. Now, if you make that bad mistake and then you sell that property, you take a paper loss and make it a hard dollar loss.
Right.
But if you have the ability to hold on to it, the market will come back to you.
Yeah. So let me ask this. So just kind of talk a little bit, and you don't have to be strategy or anything, but just like some people, I see this with individuals. They get started and they're like, it's like the world opened up. And they're like, oh, I can go after everything. And you got 5 or 6 different things. You're chasing this, you're chasing that, you're chasing this. Do you as far as like, targeting property, stuff like that, do you like to be hyper local? Kind of like, hey, or how do you like, not saying to start with,
yeah.
Like, hey, start small and start local and get comfortable with an area.
I like the local because, look, when we get started, we're all going to overmanage this thing.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have it where you can get to it and see it, it's going to drive you crazy. Mm-hmm. And then if anything goes wrong, it's going to be 10 times as bad.
Yeah.
So I like for people to start local and to stay, I typically say about 30 minutes within where they live for the first couple, mm-hmm. so that you get a little bit of confidence under you. So that if you have that desire and absolute unquenchable need to be able to go look at it every day, you can do that and it not be a burden.
Yeah.
But then after you've done a couple, and typically what happens is we change price range. And I teach that a lot more faster today than I did when I was doing it. I hung around. This is one of the conversations with Mark, do bigger deals.
Yeah.
Well, duh, and it just, it was like pouring a bucket of cold water over my head. I was like, wow, how come I didn't think of that? Because that's the simplest possible answer there is. And so we stress people, we push people now, okay, you've done a couple in this price range. Let's bump you. And it's ultimately getting them to where they're going to be doing luxury properties that still have a 20+% of the retail price spread in them, mm-hmm. but the dollar amounts are significantly larger. And then we're still taking that money and we're going and we're buying rentals. Now, I don't buy single families. I'm looking at duplexes, trips, and quads, and then small buildings.
Yeah.
Excuse me. We get them in small buildings. And then it's like, okay, so you've done a couple of buildings at 8 to 12, 14 units. about time we do a 25 to 30, you know, and you can't, and for the most part, can't's a strong word, but for the most part, you're going to start to geographically expand naturally when you start looking at apartments.
Yeah. I remember when I first met you many years ago, you actually had said something about that, and obviously this price is not the same now, but the number was 300,000. I remember being, like, hey, above 300, because at that time a single family home, a lot of those were 100,000, or I know that was about, we had on one of ours was about 100,000. So I remember kind of hearing that, and that has stuck with me. I still hear that $300,000 number. I know it's not 300. Those are this doesn't match, but that does stick with me a lot, because that's something I remember with the conversation that you had talked about. It was that you were like, hey, it's 300 or more, and nothing. You spend more time. There's less competition. There's less people you're having to fight.
And by the way, you see competition drop off at 300 here right now.
Do you really?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you start hitting a half to about 750, and it drops off big time.
Yeah.
So I'm doing some work with a guy out of Vegas right now that doesn't do anything under $3 million. I just love him to death. And he has 5 competitors in Las Vegas, and he knows every one of them personally.
That's awesome.
I was like, dude, that now becomes a goal of mine, is to be in a price range so that I know not some of my competitors, I know all of them.
Right.
And he's gotten referrals when guys, just like we do with wholesale deals, hey, I got too much property right now. You want this? And he's gotten multi-million-dollar properties from those other 5 guys because of the same thing. Hey, I found this. I can't buy it right now. And he typically will do 2-3 deals a year.
Mm-hmm.
But he's making a quarter or more, 250, a quarter or more per deal. He's doing fine. And so I was like, he's got a house that he's selling for 7.5 in Sedona, Arizona, that just finished, and he sent me all the pictures. I was just like, oh my Lord. And it's like 6,800 feet, and this just dropped. It's an Architectural Digest house is what it looks like. And they're selling it for 7.5, and he's got 3 in it. He's like, I can take a discount and walk away really good.
I like that. I like that concept. It's just, you just know your competitors. There's not really, like, you don't
Isn't that
have
great?
to, versus, because when you are, I haven't heard it put like that, because just thinking about that, in that price, it makes sense, because in that price range, if you're 150, if you're in the trap house world of 100, everybody's has a little bit of money for that, and if you're and then you're at that 250 range, 200, that's your typical home right now, is what things are looking like. And there's so many wholesalers, so many people. You can even just see on Facebook, like, bidding, there's another one, there's another one. Hey, we got to get rid of this. But, to know just who you're dealing with, that would be killer.
Another great side of evolving to that, because I wouldn't suggest you just jump in that.
Right.
Because you can get your head handed to you on a mistake, and, you're dealing a $4 million property. But another process of that evolves to that as you're growing those numbers, is that there's only a certain number of agents that deal in those price properties.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's 3 people in Fort Worth that consistently are dealing in those $2 million and up properties. Now, there's 100 agents that'll get one every now and then. But I think, and I'm going to give him a plug here, John Zimmerman.
You didn't have to say it. I already knew John Zimmerman was actually, when we bought the property that we're in now, it was one of his agents that actually was the agent behind it, because John was referred to us by another person that we know, who actually has helped us greatly along the way. And he's like, you need to just call Zimmerman. And I remember when I called Zimmerman, I called him, and he's like, well, I actually can't really help you right now, but I can get one of my agents. I'm on vacation with my kids. And I was like, I got to have a brokerage, man. Between watching what you did and then talking to Zimmer, certain things in life stick out in your head,
Yeah.
and that Zimmerman's sticks out in my head. And I see his photo all the time,
Yeah.
up and down
Yeah.
Hewley. I spend a lot of time
Yeah.
in Clear Fork, and there it is, John Zimmerman. He's on the bus stop, whatever. But that sticks out in my head because when he said that, I remember that phone call, and he's like, "I'm on vacation with my kids," and in my mind, it goes back to what we talked about. I'm busting my ass in the martial arts school, and it's just like a spinning wheel of death that never stops, and you're constantly going and going and going. I was like, how do I get to where Zimmerman's at? Like, where do I
Yeah.
get to just stop for a second and enjoy this ride for a little bit? So,
Well,
yeah.
And that's that thing. So when you look at, not only do I know who the agents are that deal with this, and
Mhm.
there's only a few. Yeah. And so those are the people that when you want to go have lunch with someone, those are the people that you schmooze. Those are the people that you go take to lunch. Those are the people that are helping you find the properties that you're looking for. Well, it's the same thing with contractors.
Mhm.
There's a gazillion handymen, but as you change the pricing circle, the contractor circle changes.
Yeah.
And it gets smaller and smaller. The numbers get larger and larger, and the people you deal with get smaller and smaller. And it's so much fun to get to know those people. Jamie Adams was my agent for, I guess, 12 years, my personal agent, growing through the business. And Jamie, incredible guy, love him to death. And if there were a ball player coming into the Metroplex that I knew, and he says, "Hey, I need to buy a house," even though I own a brokerage firm, I'd be going, "I'm going to refer you to Jamie because he knows your market better than anybody else in this, I believe, in the state of Texas, but certainly in the Metroplex. He knows what you might be looking for, where it is, and how to get it."
Yeah.
And so those are the people you want. You want to know who the people are that have found their niche. And if it happens to overlap with what you do, those are the people that you want to get to know.
Mhm.
And those are the people you want to build your business with. For years, I'd have people that would still do. So like, how many title companies do you use? I use one. "Oh, I like to spread my business around." I'm like, well, good for you. Spread it around. I like to be able to call the manager of my title company that we throw all of our business to. I can call her at 9:00 at home.
Mhm.
Because she knows that if I call, it's something important, and that I'm not going to call this as something important, but I matter.
Yeah.
My business matters. Oh, yeah, everybody's business matters to them. Mine matters a whole lot more than yours does because I do a whole lot more business. And so I like to throw all of it one way. I don't want to spread it.
Yeah.
I want to stay focused with it. And I'm going to tell you an incredible book to read. And it's, by the way, Mark Victor Hansen. It's Hansen and Jack Canfield, and it's The Power of Focus. And Mark's written probably a dozen bestsellers. Crack the Millionaire Code is one of my favorites. But The Power of Focus is a life changer because we get so spread out. You were talking about the world opens up to a new investor, and I got to start doing all this. No, stay focused. Pick a niche. Pick somebody that you resonate with to learn that niche and go that path and learn that inside out.
Mhm.
And the power of focus has such incredible techniques to be able to do that, because that's the biggest thing I see, not just with real estate investors, but with most people, is an inability to stay focused on one thing. And God knows I've been guilty of that.
Yeah.
So it's just been an incredibly impactful book, The Power of Focus.
Focus and discipline go a long
And
way.
you really can't have one without the other.
Right.
It's almost impossible to have discipline and not be focused.
Yep.
And you can't be focused and not have discipline.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you can separate the two.
Yeah. They have to go together. I got to ask, man. So you mentioned contractors. Do they get better with price? do they get? We just had one quit on us the other day, and I'm like, damn. But do they get? Obviously, we're not dealing in that price range of what you're talking about. But do they get better when you start, as that circle gets smaller, or you still have to deal with some of the nonsense?
Oh yeah, I still have to deal with some. This weekend I was at a party in Mira Vista, and so there was one contractor there, and of course, we end up talking to each other like a magnet, you know, and so
It looks like the Step Brothers.
you
do karate? Were we best friends?
So I'm talking to this guy, and he's telling me, I said, I know your work. And I said, I'm curious, give me some pricing. So we're yakking. And so I'm with a real estate agent. I'm dating a real estate agent. There's a shock. And so she comes up, and they obviously know each other. And he leaves, and she goes, that's the guy I was telling you about that charged $6,000 to pull carpet out of a house. I'm like, do what? Because she had told me this story. She said, you know, I had some friends that needed work done on a house, and she just sent them to this guy instead of calling me, which I was like, well, hey, that's your problem. So it's okay. She said, no, that's a guy. And I'm like, come on, are you kidding? And she goes, no, it's really $6,000 to simply remove the carpet out of a property. And I'm like, that's like a $500 job. You know, that's not and she goes, yeah, I didn't think it was 500, but I certainly didn't think it was $6,000. And so you still deal with I call it kind of the nonsense side of the business. But through the years, just like we were talking about with real estate agents, you find those people that work in a certain niche. My flooring guy, Scott Stavenhagen, he's a brother. I mean, he's got S&S flooring, and I just end up, he gets everything. He gets all of my referrals. He gets all of my business, because I haven't had a job yet with him that I ever had to go, dude, man, we got a problem here. You know, this didn't look right. It didn't price out right. I mean, and those are the people that when you find them, you hang on tooth and nail. And so the more you do, the more you are apt to find those people.
Yeah.
And so when you find them, you lock in, and my title manager retired recently, and it crushed me. I'm just like, no, you can't do that. No, you did not call and say, can I retire? No, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, you're staying on just for me. But that loyalty goes a long way.
Absolutely.
I mean, would you say you're because we've had this conversation recently ourselves, Misty and I, would you say you're willing to pay a little bit more for someone that you're loyal to than to pay less for someone who may get the job done?
Absolutely.
Cheaper?
If you earn my trust, you're going to have to break it.
Yeah.
And it can be broken.
Mm-hmm.
And if you break it, we'll see where it goes from there, and it'll certainly be different. But the people that I hang with are the people that they earned it, and they earn it every job that we do.
Yeah.
And I just look at that and I go, you know, I don't want, I get hit by flooring people all the time. Oh, I know them. We can do a job cheaper than them. I'm like, congrats.
Yeah.
I'm proud for you. Well, give us a shot. I will if I have a need to.
Yeah.
And I haven't had a need to in years, and I don't think I'll ever have a need to.
Because you know it get done. You know your flooring guy is going to walk in and be like, bam, done.
When he tells me a price, I know it's going to be that price.
Yeah.
And it may be a little higher than I wanted it to be. But I know that he's going to come in at that or under. And when he tells me it's going to be done by this date, I don't worry about it. It never crosses my mind again, because he's earned that from all the job performance. And, you know, he'll come in and he'll say some things. He's like, hey, have you ever thought about this on that particular? Because I love the design part. Mm-hmm. Now that I stay involved with, I just get off on that. I love, you know, restructuring the inside layout, and that really turns me. I just get off on that. So he'll say, hey, have you ever thought about doing this? I'm like, wow, no, let's try that. You know, and what's the cost going to be for that if we do it that way? You know, and so that's, you know, I love those kind of relationships, and those people are friends of mine. Mm-hmm. They didn't start out as friends. They started out as contractors. They became friends because they did such a good job over and over and over. I liked who they were as people. I like to be able to know that this person is what they stand for. If they tell me they're going to do this, and it's going to be this time frame and this, whatever, that's what's going to happen. And so guys like Scott have just earned that through the years. And, you know, then you look at them, and it's, you know, we have drinks together typically maybe once a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just we'll end up somewhere. I'm like, hey, I'm going to be over here. Yeah, I'm by that way. Let's go grab a beer somewhere or something. And those are the relationships from a business standpoint that makes your business family.
Mm.
And you want to be at that point at some point in your life. You want it to be able to grow and evolve to where this is not just a business transaction, because when we sell somebody a property, I'm not selling them a house. I'm selling them a place for those boys to grow up.
Yeah.
And that changes the game. And when you start thinking about it that way and you start looking at it that way, it changes how you feel about your business. And I'm going to tell you, the first seller finance housing I read, I love seller financing, the first seller finance house I ever did. The lady comes in and calls me and she wants to look at it, loves it, blah, 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 fine. So like we start talking about down payment and I'm like, maybe that'll work. If your credit's compatible, I might be able to make that work. And she goes, my credit's terrible. and I'm going to promise you, if anybody tells you they have bad credit, they are not lying. That is a truthful statement every time. And she said, my credit's terrible. I'm like, okay. And so I look at it and I was like, yep, she's right. And I said, well, tell me what's going on here. Because I see, looking at your report, that you were spotless. And then about 18 months ago, you fell off a cliff somewhere. What happened? And she said, well, I got divorced. And he had taken all of our savings about before I knew anything was going, and blah, blah, blah. It was just one of those nightmare divorce stories. And said, but I'm still in the same job. And for about the past 4 or 5 months, she'd been spot on track again. Bam, 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 bam. So I said, we're going to do this deal. I really didn't think it was like, okay, I'm taking a little bit of a gamble. Maybe I felt pretty good about her. So we show up at my CPA's office, and I now do all those at my attorney's office. But we showed up at my CPA's office this time to give it a more legitimate feel, more business professional feel. And we're in the conference room, and we're going through the contract. We get through the contract, and I lay the pen on it, and I slide it across the table to her. She picks it up, and she's like this. Her hand is shaking so bad, it's like she has palsy. And I'm like, hey, you okay? She's like, yeah. And she starts signing her name. And as she's doing that, starts crying. And it's a little bit, it's not much, but I'm like, holy cow. So I get up and I walk around this, I'm like, I put my hand on her shoulder, you sure you're okay? Finishes her name. Stands up, gives this big hug. Now the waterfall's going. And I'm getting choked up telling you guys, I'm just like, golly, this is not professional it's okay for her to cry. It's not professional for me to cry. And so, I'm like, what's wrong? And she goes, this is the first time my son has ever been able to have a dog because we have a yard. And I just went, that's why you do this.
Yeah.
Anybody can do it to make money, but you can change other people's lives when you do this, and you can get paid to do it. You can get paid very nicely to do it. But those kind of things stand with you. Those kind of things make it when a deal's just, some of them, just go sideways from day one. It just happens. And then you remember those dimes and you go, yeah, we're fine. We'll figure this out,
It makes me think of the statement, the more people you help, the more money you make.
Yeah.
This is,
yeah.
I mean,
and you can't do it for that reason.
Yeah.
You just got to do it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And if you're in a position, look, and I mentioned this earlier, I've had so many people help me through my life. I mean, I had a student write a book, and I gave him some pointers on it and stuff. And he said, "Will you endorse it?" And I said, "I'll read it, and if I like it, I'll endorse it." Yes. So he sends it to me, and it was called Self-Made. And I called him, and I read the book, and I thought it was excellent. I read the book, and I said, I can't do this. And he was like, why? I'm like, because your title. And he goes, what? And I'm like, you're not something. He says, yes, I am. And I'm like, dude, there ain't a one of us that's self-made.
Yeah.
And the stronger you believe you were self-made probably means you had more people help you than maybe I had helped me. And I can tell you, I've had feels like thousands. But you have to understand that if you're doing it because you can and you can impact somebody positively in their life, then that's what you should do.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. He should almost title it "Did the Work." I got help and did the work.
Yeah, there were
That's really
so
what it
many
is.
other options other than self-made. I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking no.
I got help and did the work. What you need to do when someone helps you. So let me kind of run back to seller finance a little bit. So you mentioned that you really enjoy those. Just kind of, you don't have to talk. I mean, just kind of touch on that a little bit. Everyone has their opinion. I know some people are like, they'll never sell anything or seller finance. Some are like, hey, I don't even want to deal with that. I just want to seller finance everything I've got.
Yeah, it's a drug.
Yeah. Is that it?
So, and we're getting back into this market where as the market continues to soften nationally, and that's being very kind when I say soften, yeah, because, not to get too political, but Biden's going to destroy this thing. It's this crazy, the economic policies that are going on.
I think almost anyone who's involved in real estate could just agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't really get political on it, but like it's very clear what side usually is like pro real estate and pro destroying it.
Well, I crack up because I voted for Jimmy Carter. So the first presidential election that I was old enough to vote in was Jimmy Carter, and I was so proud. I was like, he's a Southerner, and I was born and raised in Alabama. I'm like, he's not Alabama, he's Georgia, but that's good enough. We're going to finally get a Southerner in the White House, and I voted for him. And he seems to be an incredibly nice man, economically inept beyond belief. So he is Joe Biden's biggest fan because Biden's the only guy that has had a worse economy than Carter. Yeah. So, as this as interest rates continue to move up and as inflation continues to move up and most Americans understand the real number because we go to the grocery store, we go to the gas station, we see the real number. They can say it's 3% or whatever. It's like, it might be for you. It's not for the rest of us that live in America. And so we know those numbers, and the numbers are not going to calm down any. They're going to get worse and worse and worse until there's a change. And that's up to us. That's our responsibility when the elections roll around. It's our responsibility to voice through voting that it's time for a change. And so we're going to continue to see this market. And look, part of this also is the fact that real estate is cyclical, and we were due for a downturn.
Yep.
So this got expedited, and it will hit harder with the economic policies, but we were going to go here anyway.
Yeah.
I do want to make sure that we all understand that. This was going to happen. It's going to happen harder, deeper, longer, coupled with the economic policies, but we were due. We were overdue. We got a 10-year run out of this upcycle. That's pretty doggone good.
They were like, hey, just shut the world down. We'll go and solve this real quick.
We were in really good shape. So I always remind people that, look, when you're a professional investor, you do well when the market's good. You do great when the market's bad.
Yep.
And that's what we're getting into. This is where the money's made.
Yeah.
If you're on the fence out there, if you're thinking about investing, just bite your tongue and jump on in because this is where money's made. In the next 5-6 years, certainly, there's going to be an incredible transfer of wealth from people that are making poor decisions from a real estate standpoint. When we went through this with Obama in 6, 7, 8, depending on who you read as to when that started, we had people walking away from their home because, well, my home's upside down. So? Well, no, I owe more on it than it's worth. Yeah, but it's your home.
Yeah.
It's where your family lives. What are you going to do? well, I'm going to go buy something else. Well, yeah, got a news for you. When you walk away from this one, the likelihood of getting into another one is going to get significantly tougher because underwriters don't like foreclosure on your credit report. Let me just share that with you there. But we had people do it. We're going to have people do that again. That they're just going to go, well, and I don't, and I guess it's because I'm in real estate. I don't understand that at all. I'm like, it always comes back. And when so I have DFW properties, bought it in 10, and 10 was not a banner year for real estate. It was terrible. And people were like, my friends were like, why in the world are you buying a brokerage firm? Like, because this is when you should buy.
Yeah.
When the market stinks, I don't want to buy at the height of the market. I want to buy at the bottom of the market or as close as I can. And so when you start looking at when you're doing that kind of stuff, that's the time to buy is at the bottom of the market. And we're going to see that. We're going to see, prices. We're protected a little bit in the Texas market because of the number of people that are moving in and will continue to. Thank you, New York. Thank you, New Jersey. Thank you, California. Now, thank you, Illinois.
Keep sending them.
Yeah, because what I love about it is those people that are moving in are not the liberals; they're the conservatives.
Yeah.
Because they're wanting to get away from the insanity that's going on and mainly it's political, yes, but there's a lot of tax insanity that goes on in those environments. And I lived in California for 7 years.
Was it California chases you down, right?
And yeah. You still owe us money even though you don't live here any longer.
It's the year leaving tax.
But we're protected to some degree because of the number of people that are moving. In Florida, same way. That will cool off at some point. We still will not be hit as hard as most states are going to be hit. And we're not going to be hit as hard because we still have jobs. And real estate and jobs track each other 100%. So if you want to see a good real estate market, you go where there's a good job market. If you want to see a good job market, look at a good real estate market. They go hand in hand.
Yeah.
They do not contradict each other. And so I always look at that, and I always stress when we're training to tell people, hey, you know what? Take a look at what's going on in the job market. Does the job market work in that community? Is it strong? If it is, you got a great real estate market. If it doesn't, you may have a great deal or what looks like a great deal, don't have a good market. And you may move it quickly and you may not. You may get what you want for it, you may not.
Which is why in some of your multifamilies is what you look at the job market. You want to see
Absolutely.
Is it viable to buy this, or am I buying into something that the rents aren't going to move up and things aren't going to change? It's just going to be a dump. It's not going to go. So on seller finance, so you like the seller finance?
I love it.
I love
it.
So what's your thought process behind it? Because so many people have different ways of looking at it, right? And some are like, I don't want to do it because I know someone we talked to, they're like, it's a depreciating asset. Once you sell it, that's it. You can't get more from it. So how do you, do you have like a mix? Like, I prefer to do this and keep some of the rentals, or like, what does that look like for you?
Well, I do love the rental for a long-term hold, but even rentals, I only look at 10 years.
Gotcha.
Once you start chewing up most of that depreciation from a tax standpoint, then I'm looking at dumping and starting that over again.
I hear people say 5 sometimes. So you like 10?
Personally, I like 10.
But
I'm looking at that's a trigger. That's kind of as I was starting getting close to that. Okay, now it's time to start look at moving this one. I'm still taking that and putting it back into another multifamily, but yeah, that's how I look at that. The seller financing side of it. What I like about that is, one, I love premium pricing, and you can premium price property with seller financing. I mean, appraisers will tell you this. They will tell you that house is worth about 10% more because it's open to more of the buying population because of seller financing.
Yeah.
I went through building a house as a self-employed person. It is a royal pain in the tush. Gosh, they make you jump through. I mean, a mortgage app is bad enough as it is. Yep. But if you're self-employed, it's significantly harder to run those traps. And so most of the people that I deal with in seller financing, I'm dealing with self-employed. I'm not going after the person that can't get a loan somewhere else because they have no credit and they have no cash. That's not who I'm looking for. I'm looking for business people that have wherewithal. They have credit, but it's such a burden for them to be able to go in and get a traditional mortgage, and it can affect their business credit.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we do when we find those people is we look at it and go, we're not reporting this. I'm not going to become a reporting member of the bureaus to be able to report your payments. And for a self-employed person, many times that is optimal for them. Like, great. This mortgage is not going to show up on my credit report, which means that when they're going to get business credit, because so many times, you get everybody, well, my business has its own credit. Yeah, right. If you're, if you're a QT maybe, or you're Microsoft or whatever, but, for those of us that are mere mortals, it takes a while for your business to do enough and build enough that you can get credit that matters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can get a small credit card. You can get a $10,000 credit card or something. But when you start talking about credit that matters, it takes a while to build up to that. At least that's been my experience.
No, yeah. We joke about that. You got done and Bradstreet contacting you. Hey, man, build your business credit. We're like, I got to sign for everything personally anyways. I don't need all that, So, man, I loved having you on. I feel like, it's great that, you kind of, after doing this, we've had the show for about a year now, and I've always looked forward to having you. I kind of built up to it. Look forward to having you on because, again, definitely have been
well, thank you guys.
Have been a stepping or not stepping, an inspiration in the early years for me, whether you knew it or not, to go. I got to go there. I got to go there, and I got to get there. So guys, anybody that's on that listens to this, shoot us a message or an email, and like I said, Bill will give you his book. We can hook you up.
It's a PDF. Would love to get in your hands. We're working on the 3rd edition. So,
are you really?
Yeah. So what they'll receive is the 2nd edition.
That's cool.
But
so you go back and I just got to ask. You go back and rewrite?
Yeah, I just completely disassembled it and went back, and because the 1st edition and the 1st and 2nd edition were about 7 years apart.
Yeah.
And when the 2nd edition came out, it was a completely different experience because I was in a different place.
Yep.
And more experience, and not only just real estate, but more life experience. Well, gosh, now that's been, it's 12, 13 years ago since the 2nd edition came out. And so I'm completely rewriting the book. And it's actually from a different perspective even. So it's still investors and how you get doing it, and it's a autobiographical textbook for business, but with a completely different slant on it.
It's almost like a year goes by and you're like, damn, I should have added this in now.
Oh yeah,
but if you to go do it, it's going to require a lot more work.
It's crazy how you reread it and you just go, wow, there's so much more I could have. And this first draft on this one's about 480 pages right now. And typically you want to be at about 275. And so I'm like, okay.
We have more experience to pack in.
Calm it down a little bit. Yeah.
Volume 1, volume 2.
At that point, you start adding in, especially if you're, 10, 12 years later or so, 13, you're talking, you've got so much more experience and so many more stories you could put in there. That
I'm trying to, just cherry pick the, it's always about, so people like, you tell stories for the sake of telling stories. No, you tell stories for the sake of illustrating a point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because we as human beings remember stories.
Mm-hmm.
That's how history was passed down. If you look at Christ, who was the greatest storyteller ever, it was always to illustrate a point.
Yep.
And so that's the same thing that I try to do is I'm like, okay, when I'm making this point, what reminds me of that? And since I'm almost as old as dirt, there's always a story that connects to it somewhere.
That reminds me of something because it's like you said, it's stories that does it. And this is something that has stuck with me. Another one was that I want to touch on this before we bow out. Um, the stages of Millionaire, because most people get in this game and they're like, that's like the number. Gotta be a millionaire. Obviously, that's slowly going to be changing over the course of time, but
It's not quite as meaningful now as it used to be.
as it used to be. But there's still individuals who start or they get involved. It's still such
Sure.
a milestone for them. And you talked about the three different stages, and I was hoping you talk about that a little bit. The one was obviously when you have that amount of assets, and of course two is that amount of equity, and three just that cash. So
Yeah.
could you go through that a little bit for anybody that's, and it's in the book, but I mean,
Yeah.
go through that a little bit.
So, we hit these plateaus in life. And I remember the first time that my holdings hit $1 million.
Mhm.
That's the asset. So I was like, holy cow, I got $1 million worth of real estate. Well, an accurate statement, but I didn't have $1 million worth of equity.
Right.
And for me, that became like, okay, that's the next plateau, is now to shift that from just the retail value of the properties. And of course, today, you can have one property and have $1 million
Right.
worth of asset, or, even in moderate pricing, you can have three in the DFW market, and you certainly have $1 million. And so I started like, okay, let's make this transition from $1 million worth of asset to $1 million worth of equity, which pushes the asset number up significantly.
Mhm.
And that becomes a meaningful number when you hit $1 million in equity. And then the transition from $1 million in equity to $1 million in cash is now I've started to not only liquidate some of those, but I'm replacing them as well and taking that and converting it into cash.
Yeah.
And so and then you start looking at, okay, now that there's $1 billion in cash, what am I doing with that? And it tends to, especially for those of us in the business, we tend to revert right back to what we're doing and like, okay, now I'm going to take that cash and I'm going to go buy more assets.
Yeah,
with
that's
it.
addiction.
And so it's this interesting circle that goes on.
So on that circle, that isn't. I can't hold on to money long enough. Like it burns a hole in my pocket, not in a bad way, but like I gotta. Even
It's
we
not
do.
working for you.
Yeah, even we do a refinance. I'm like, I gotta find another property. Like
Yeah.
it goes from.
Yeah.
It literally just flows to the title company. Shoop. I never even saw it in the account. Maybe a day or two. If anything. So, so what do you feel like is the hardest stage for an individual? Because people hear that term all the time, especially with social media. Oh, millionaire, 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 and some people don't realize that there are three stages to that. There are three different stages. What do you feel like is one of the hardest stages to hit? Do you feel like it's that initial getting there, or do you the asset part? Do you feel like maybe it's the equity part, or do you feel like that cash part?
Yeah, I think when you're starting, it's because again, it's so easy to hit the asset number,
Yeah, especially now.
but that changes when you hit the equity number.
Hmm.
So I think that's the kind of the breakthrough moment is when you realize, okay, yeah, I got several $1 million worth of property, but I got $1 million worth of equity. So if I liquidated those properties, I can have $1 million worth of cash. Well, as you continue to grow the asset number, which logically continues to grow the equity number, and you start rolling some of those assets and you're moving cash out, then you get to the point where you're pulling some of that cash to keep.
Hmm.
So I love Dave Ramsey. There's also another guy named John Kamuta that I just think the world of. And they're very similar in their aspects. One of the things that, and I taught Financial Peace University of Dave's at our church for several times and love it. It doesn't really, in my opinion, doesn't address folks like us. It's really for people that have a factory job or they have an office
Right.
job and their own salary, and there's not much likelihood that things are going to change for them. And especially the way that things can change for us, which they can change rapidly and dramatically. So, and Kamuta, I think, in my opinion, does a better job of that side of money management and how's the best way to grow it so that, the Bible tells us that it's not our job to leave our kids with inheritance. Our job's to leave their kids with inheritance.
I agree.
And that's a very different statement. And you have to look at how you structure everything to get to that point. And so I think that the mind shift that happens from having $1 million in assets to having $1 million in equity is probably, for me, it was the toughest. And the cash part became significantly easier because I was just focused on the equity piece.
Mm-hmm.
And we have multiple LLCs. I teach all my folks, and I still do consulting on a regular basis. It's like, hey, pick a number that's good for you. When I started, 250 was the number of equity, the dollar amount of equity that I wanted in one LLC. And then once I hit that, I would move it. So it's been $1 million for a long time now. But so once I hit that equity, so the asset value in that LLC maybe from one to the next will be very different. But it's the equity value that I look at. And if the equity value hits $1 million, then I'm looking at, okay, it's time to go start another LLC because I just don't want too much exposure wrapped up into any one entity.
Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot. Well, man, I loved having you on. That was a killer explanation.
Thank you, guys.
How can anybody get a hold of your website or anything if you want to share that? Anything?
Yeah.
Or
So
you got seminars coming up or anything like that?
Yeah.
Too,
well, I kind of make most of the clubs around town about once a year. And you mentioned Robin. I love Robinson and been doing those for years. I'm coming up on them again. Jimmy Reed over in Fort Worth, Roger Hodgkin over at North Texas. Those guys, I love those people. And the clubs have always been very kind to me. So keep a lookout. And if you're not going to a club, you should. I mean, there's just too much good information that comes at the clubs, and the ability to network is important in our business. And then, so right now I have 40ROI.com, so 40returnOnInvestment.com. It was a thing I started actually when COVID hit and we got in the lockdown. I started looking at my business, and I have several different partners. I have multiple businesses, and I have partners in all those businesses. And I was talking to a partner I have down in Miami, and we do Section 8 stuff together. And the only thing that didn't change during the lockdown was the Section 8. Everything else hit tough times. I know you can't evict anybody. Well, gee, I kind of believe if you don't pay, you can't stay. Well, that wasn't the case during that time. And mortgage payments on those properties didn't stop. The banks didn't go, oh, well, it's okay. We know that, you can't evict them, so we're not going to take it. Yeah, that's not how that works. And so I really just started locking into looking at what's my cash on cash return on this. Now, I knew it, but I didn't think about it from a marketing aspect. And I started looking, and I was like, most of these properties are more than 40% return on investment, cash on cash. Mm-hmm. And that's a good number. And some of them are significantly higher than that. So I started building 40ROI.com, which is all about how you focus your energy on the deals that produce you the right rates of return.
Yeah.
And when you can get, one of the things that my dad did, my dad was an entrepreneur. He did flips and stuff. But one of the things he did was in high school, when I was in high school, he bought a shoe store, and he ended up having a small chain of shoe stores in Alabama. And he would take me with him to go buy shoes. And several times a year, we would go into these stores that were going out of business. And he would go in and he would say, I'll give you a nickel a pair for everything that's left. Just count them up. And I'm like, because I'm looking at the inventory and I'm going, Dad, no, these shoes look so bad. Dude, these would be so embarrassing to have these in our store. He's like, oh, boy, we'll be okay. Pay attention. Keep your eyes and your ears open. Pay attention. You might learn something. And so what he would do is he would go through all that inventory and say we bought 5,000 pair. There might be 20 or 30 pair that would go into our store at a retail price. So they might go in for $100 that he paid a nickel for. The rest of them went in our warehouse. And I'm like, what are we going to do with these? And so then he would run these big ads back when you actually had a newspaper and read the newspaper. he'd run these double page. They call them double page ads. We call them Bill's Shoe Barn. Bill's Shoe Barn sidewalk sale. Nothing over $1. And the first one we did, I thought, well, this is going to be such a whipping, you know. And people would come out and they would buy 10 and 20 pair of shoes. So they bring their family out and they just, because they're $1, there was nothing over $1.
Yeah.
And it was almost like they felt guilty. And they would go in the store and they'd pick up 2, 3, 4 pair at full retail. And those were always the biggest weekends we ever had. And we got so many customers out of that. And I was like, oh, I see it. It's a marketing thing. And he's like, you still don't get it. I'm like, what? He goes, learn math. And I'm like, sir, I make good grades. But he's like, no, learn it up here. We paid a nickel and we sold it for $1.
Yeah.
What's your return rate? And I'm like, well, I hadn't thought about that. So Steve Martin did The Jerk many years ago, and there's a scene in there where he's giving away pencils at the midway, and he goes, oh, it's a profit thing. And when it finally sunk in that, okay, it's my rate of return. Yeah, my dad was one of the most brilliant business people that I ever met. And I was probably in my 40s before that really started sinking in.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, so yeah.
And
so
that's the birth of 40ROI.com.
40ROI.com. And it's that when I'm looking at rental property, I'm not going into anything that I can't get at least 40% on a yearly basis on my cash out of pocket. So cash on cash return.
Yeah, absolutely. And guys, again, we can get you the book for free. But also if you want to go on and buy it as well, it's Are You Dumb Enough to Be Rich? It's a great book. Get it. I recommend it. I've given it to numerous friends that get involved in business, and it'll help you guys out a lot. So
and keep a lookout for the new one.
Yes, I'm gonna get the new one. So, but man, thank you very much for coming out. It was awesome.
It's an honor to be here.
And we hope to have you on another time. And that's it, guys. We'll catch you guys next time.